Chapter 13, Variables and Unsaid Truths. S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve's POV. Steve walks into the lab as Tony and Bruce is speaking to each other. Hey, are you nuts? Tony looks at Steve, then back at Bruce. Jury's out. You really have got a lid on it, haven't you? What's your secret? Mellow jazz, bongo drums, huge bag of weed. Steve looks at Tony. Is everything a joke to you? Tony looks at Steve. Funny things are. Steve crosses his arms. Threatening the safety of everyone on this ship isn't funny. No offense, Doc. Bruce smiles as he looks at the computer. It's all right. I wouldn't have come aboard if I couldn't handle pointy things. Tony scoffs as he moves. You're tiptoeing, big man. You need to strut. Steve watches Tony. And you need to focus on the problem, Mr. Stark. Tony looks at Steve. Do you think I'm not? Why did Fury call us in? Why now? Why not before? What isn't he telling us? I can't do the equation unless I have all the variables. Steve keeping his arms crossed. You think Fury's hiding something. Tony shrugs. He's a spy. Captain, he's the spy. His secrets have secrets. It's bugging him too, isn't it? Bruce looks over. I just want to finish my work here and... Steve looks over to Bruce. Doctor. Bruce hesitates before removing his glasses. A warm light for all mankind. Loki's jab at Fury about the cube. Steve does a little nod. I heard it. Bruce points at Tony. I think that was meant for you. Tony looks away as he holds out a packet of blueberries. Bruce takes some. Even if Barton didn't tell Loki about the tower, it was still all over the news. Steve looks confused. The Stark Tower, that big, ugly building in New York. Bruce looks down. It's powered by an arc reactor, a self-sustaining energy source. That building will run itself for, what? A year. Tony shrugged again. It's just the prototype. I'm kind of the only name in clean energy right now. Steve looks at Tony as Tony continues. That's what he's getting at. Steve looks at Bruce. Bruce looks at them. So why didn't S.H.I.E.L.D. bring him in on the Tesseract project? What are they doing in the energy business in the first place? Tony moves again. I should probably look into that once my decryption program finishes breaking into all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s secure files. Steve looks at Tony confused. I'm sorry, did you say? Tony speaks up again. Jarvis has been running it since I hit the bridge. In a few hours, I'll know every dirty secret S.H.I.E.L.S. has ever tried to hide. Blueberry. Steve looks at him. Yet you're confused about why they didn't want you around. Tony looks at Steve. An intelligence organization that fears intelligence. Historically, not awesome. Steve looks away for a moment before back at Tony. I think Loki's trying to wind us up. This is a man who means to start a war, and if we don't stay focused, he'll succeed. We have orders. We should follow them. Tony shakes his head. Following's not really my style. Steve lifts his head up slightly. And you're all about style, aren't you? Tony looks away for a moment before looking back at Steve. Of the people in this room, which one is A, wearing a spangly outfit, and B, not of use? Bruce speaks up. Steve, tell me none of this smells a little funky to you. Steve looks at Bruce for a moment before looking at Tony, then walks off. Just find the cube. Steve walks out of the lab, and he thinks to himself for a moment before walking toward the hull of the ship. Scroll. Alisa's POV. Alisa walks back and forth in her room, muttering to herself. Steve, there's something I must tell you. No, that probably won't work. Alisa sighs to herself as she sat on her bed before looking at the picture of Nick. Alisa whispers, How did you tell me Nick? A sudden ring shattered the quiet, and Alisa jumped, her heart leaping into her throat as her phone buzzed on the bed beside her. She grabbed her phone and seized the name on the screen, Monroe. Her fingers hovered for a second before she answered. Monroe, she said softly. Hey, his voice came through, warm and familiar. Okay, this might sound weird, but I had a feeling you weren't okay. Normally, you would come around to mine at this time. I'm really not, she admitted. There was a brief pause on the other end. Do you want to talk about it? Monroe asked gently. Or do you want me to help you figure out how to talk about it? Alisa hesitated for a moment. I don't know how to tell Steve. Every time I try and come up with a way, the words get stuck. I don't want to lose him, and I don't want to lie anymore either. Monroe hummed thoughtfully. Yeah, that's a nasty crossroads. She hugged her knees to her chest. Nick made it so easy when he told me. Like honesty didn't have to be terrifying. Nick had a gift, Monroe said softly. But you do too, Alisa. You just forget it when you're scared. She swallowed. I need your help. There was no hesitation in his reply. You've got it, he said firmly. Whatever you need. Rehearsal, pep talk, moral support, or me physically standing nearby with a crossbow for emotional intimidation. A weak laugh slipped out of her. Thank you. Any time, Monroe said. You don't have to do this alone. You never did. Alisa looked back at Nick's photo as Monroe ended the call. Okay, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Okay, let's do this. Chapter 14, an old-fashioned notion. Shield. Steve's POV. Steve pulls open the door to the hull, and he walks in and looks around before hearing a couple of agents talking, and he jumps onto the railing and follows the sound. After a while, Steve opens something up, and he sees some hydro weapons before looking to see if anyone is watching. Time skip back at Banner's lab. Steve drops a gun on the table after Tony asks, "What's Phase 2?" Steve looks at him. Phase 2 is S.H.I.E.L.D. uses the cube to make weapons. Sorry, computer was moving a little slow for me. Nick walks over. Rogers, we gathered everything related to the Tesseract. This does not mean that we're making. Tony speaks up. I'm sorry, Nick, what were you lying? Steve looks at Nick. I was wrong, Director. The world hasn't changed a bit. Bruce looks over to Natasha and Thor. Did you know about this? Natasha, low 0, K's over to Bruce. You want to think about removing yourself from this environment, Doctor. Bruce scoffs. I was in Calcutta. I was pretty well removed. Natasha walks over slowly. Loki is manipulating you. Bruce crosses his arms. And you've been doing what exactly? Natasha looks at him. You didn't come here because I bat my eyelashes at you. Bruce shakes his head. Yes, and I'm not leaving because suddenly you get a little twitchy. I like to know why S.H.I.E.L.D. is using the Tesseract to build weapons of mass destruction. Nick speaks up as he points to Thor. Because of him. Thor looks confused. Me. Nick explains. Last year, Earth had a visitor from another planet who had a grudge match that leveled a small town. We learned that not only are we not alone, but we are hopelessly, hilariously outgunned. Thor shakes his head. My people want nothing but peace with your planet. Nick looks over to Thor. But you're not the only people out there, are you? And you're not the only threat. The world filling up with people who can't be matched, that can't be controlled. Steve speaks up confused. Like you controlled the cube. Thor walks over to Nick. Your work with the Tesseract is what drew Loki to it, and his allies. It is a signal to all the realms that the Earth is ready for a higher form of war. Steve looks confused. A higher form. Nick looks at Thor. You forced our hand. We had to come up with something. Tony speaks up again. A nuclear deterrent, because that always calms everything right down. Nick looks over to Tony. Remind me again how you made your fortune, Stark. Steve walks closer. I'm sure if he still made weapons, Stark would be neck deep. Tony raised a hand. Wait, hold on, how is this now about me? Steve looks at him. I'm sorry isn't everything. Thor looks at Nick. I thought humans were more evolved than this. Nick looks at Thor. Excuse me, did we come to your planet and blow stuff up? Thor crosses his arms. You treat your champions with such mistrust. Natasha sighs to herself. Are you boys really that naive? S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors potential threats. Bruce looks confused, then looks over to Steve. Captain America's on threat watch. Natasha looks over to him. We all are. Tony speaks up. Wait, you're on that list. Are you above or below angry bees? Steve looks at Tony. Stark, so help me God if you make one more wise crack. As they argue, they don't notice that Loki's scepter is glowing brightly. Thor scoffs. You speak of control, yet you court chaos. Bruce speaks up. That's his MO, isn't it? I mean, what are we, a team? No, we're a chemical mixture that makes chaos. We're a time bomb. Nick walks over to Bruce. You need to step away. Tony shrugs his shoulders as he speaks up. Why shouldn't the guy let off a little steam? Tony puts his hands on Steve's shoulders, and Steve removes it as he speaks up. You know damn well why. Back off. Tony looks over to him. I'm starting to want you to make me. Steve scoffs. Yeah, big man in a suit of armor, take that off, what are you? Tony looks at him. Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. Natasha tilts her head in a way that says, he's not wrong. Steve speaks up again. I know guys with none of that worth 10 of you. I've seen the footage. The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you. Tony stares at him. I think I would just cut the wire. Steve smiles cockily. Always a way out. You may not be a threat, but you better stop pretending to be a hero. Tony looks at him. A hero? Like you? You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle. Steve stares at him. Put on the suit. Let's go a few rounds. Thor laughs. You people are so petty and tiny. Bruce speaks up. Yeah, this is a team. Nick looks over to Natasha. Agent Romanoff, would you escort Dr. Banner back to his? Bruce speaks up again. Where? You rented my room. Nick looks over to Bruce. The cell was just in case. Bruce crosses his arms. In case you needed to kill me, but you can't. I know I tried. Everyone looks at him as he continues. I got low, I didn't see an end. So I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out. So I moved on, I focused on helping other people. I was good, until you dragged me back into this freak show and put everyone here at risk. You want to know my secret, Agent Romanoff? You want to know how I stay calm? Steve's face softened slightly, but kept it hardened. Nick slowly reaches for his gun before speaking up. Dr. Banner. Bruce looks over to Nick as Steve speaks up. Put down the scepter. Bruce looks down in shock as he's holding the scepter, and the computer beeps, which snaps everyone's attention to it. Bruce puts down the scepter. Got it, sorry kids. You don't get to see my party trick after all. Thor looks at him. You located the Tesseract. Tony speaks up. I can get there faster. Steve shakes his head. Look, all of us. Thor speaks up. The Tesseract belongs on Asgard. No human is a match for it. Tony turns to leave, but Steve grabbed his arm. You're not going alone. Tony looks at him. You're gonna stop me. Nick looks over to them. Steve looks at Tony. Put on the suit and we'll find out. Steve and Tony gets in each other's face as Tony finishes up. I'm not afraid to hit an old man. Put on the suit. Bruce looks at the coordinates. Oh my God. A few minutes later, everyone is thrown in every direction. Steve, Fury, Thor, and Tony are thrown across while Natasha and Bruce are down in the lower equipment room. Steve looks up at Tony. Put on the suit. Yep. Tony and Steve get up after Steve helps him up. Time skip outside at the engine. Steve and Tony runs beside each other toward the engine room. Tony looks over to Steve. Engine 3, I'll meet you there. Steve looks over to Tony and nods before running off. Time skip engine room. Steve pries open the door and he sees agents and runs with them to the engine. Steve shouts as he looks at the wreckage. Stark, I'm here. Tony speaks up through the comms. Good. Tony flies over in his Iron Man suit. Let's see what we've got. Tony mutters to himself as he looks through the files that JARVIS is showing him. I got to get this superconducting coolant system back online before I can access the rotors, work on dislodging the debris. Tony begins pulling on the stuck rotors before looking over to Steve. I need you to get that engine control panel and tell me which relays are in overload position. Steve nods before jumping over to the other side of the broken railing. Steve gets himself to the control panel and opens it up. Tony speaks up. What's it looks like in there? Steve looks at them as he's confused. It seems to run on some form of electricity. Tony checks his flies again. Well, you're not wrong. Tony continuously blasts broken debris off the turbine engine. It's bad, but still fixable. Steve speaks up through the comms. Okay, the relays are intact. What's our next move? Tony replies, even if I clear the rotors, this thing won't re-engage without a jump. I'm going to have to get in there and push. Steve looks out for him. If that thing gets up to speed, you'll be shredded. Tony looks through his files once more. That stator control unit can reverse the polarity long enough to disengage maglev, and that could. Steve cuts in. Speak English. Tony pulls a face slightly that says, "Are you serious?" before speaking up again. You see that red lever? It will slow the rotors down long enough for me to get out. Steve looks over to the red lever and walks over to it. Tony continues. Stand by it, wait for my word. Steve jumps over to the lever. Scroll. Alisa's POV. Alisa arrives at her tailor that her late husband Nick gave her after Monroe helps her with how to tell Steve she's a Grimm, and she walks inside before sitting down at the desk and catching up on creatures and their weaknesses. She took her time to learn the language. Hexist beasts, Blutbed Futchsbow. Alisa looks at the book as she thought about Steve, wondering about his reactions to the book, to the weapons she uses to stop these creatures. Alisa whispers to herself, okay, I can do this. Maybe this book will help me more. Shield. Steve's POV. Tony finishes up the damage as the other soldiers moves closer, but Steve notices them, and he jumps to knock back the grenade and starts the fight with the soldiers. Steve throws one of the soldiers out of the plane and sees another soldier aiming their gun at him before Steve grabs the gun that's on the floor and shoots at the soldier as he steps back. But he went back too far and nearly fell before he grabbed a wire to hang onto. Tony doesn't know he's not near the lever. Rogers, pull the lever. Steve yells as he gets himself up. I need a minute here. Tony yells back, lever now, although. Steve manages to get to the lever and pulls it before Tony helps him with the soldier. Everyone hears that Coulson died through Nick Fury through the comms before they gather at the table. Nick looks over to Steve. These were in Phil Coulson's jacket. I guess he never did get you to sign them. Nick walks over to Steve and gives him the cards, and Steve carefully picks them up as Nick continues. We're dead in the air up here. Our communications, the location of the cube, banner, Thor. I got nothing for you. I lost my one good eye, maybe I had that coming. Yes, we were going to build an arsenal with the Tesseract. I never put all my chips on that number, though, because I was playing something even riskier. There was an idea, Stark knows this, called the Avengers Initiative. The idea was to bring together a group of remarkable people, to see if they could become something more. Steve looks at Nick for a moment, before looking away as Nick continues. To see if they could work together when we needed them to fight the battles that we never could. Phil Coulson died still believing in that idea, in heroes. Tony gets an idea, and he shot up from his chair and leaves, which makes Steve and Nick look at each other confused, and Nick comments, well, it's an old-fashioned notion. Chapter 15, Opening Night. Shield. Steve's POV. Time skip, another room. Steve looks at Tony. Was he married? Tony doesn't look at him. No, there was a cellist, I think. Steve looks down. I'm sorry, he seemed like a good man. Tony scoffs before looking over to Steve. He was an idiot. Steve crosses his arms. Why? For believing. Tony walks over to him. For taking on Loki alone. Steve shakes his head. He was doing his job. Tony scoffs again. He was out of his league, he should have waited, he should have. Steve walks over to him now. Sometimes there isn't a way out, Tony. Tony looks at him. Right, I've heard that before. Steve looks at him. Is this the first time you lost a soldier? Tony was going to walk off but turns around. We are not soldiers. I'm not marching to Fury's file. Steve shook his head. Neither am I, he's got the same blood on his hands that Loki does. But right now, we got to put that behind us and get this done. Tony looks over to a wall where Coulson fell. There's a dent in the wall as Steve continues. Now Loki needs a power source, if we can put together a list. Tony looks over to him. He made it personal. Steve looks at him confused. That's not the point. Tony shakes his head as he walks closer. That is the point, that's Loki's point. He hit us all right where we live. Why? Steve realizes, to tear us apart. Yeah, divide and conquer is great, but he knows he has to take us out to win, right? That's what he wants. He wants to beat us. He wants to be seen doing it. He wants an audience. Steve watches Tony walk somewhere. Right, I caught his act in Stuttgart. Tony points at him. Yeah, that's just previews. This is opening night. And low-key, he's a full-tilt diva, right? He wants flowers, he wants parades. He wants a monument built to the skis with his name plastered. Tony stops as he realizes something, and Steve looks at him. Son of a bitch. Time skip room where Natasha and Clint is. Steve walks into the room. Time to go. Natasha looks at him. Go where? Steve looks at her. I'll tell you on the way, can you fly one of those jets? Clint walks out of the bathroom. I can. Steve looks at Clint, then at Natasha, and she lifts her head slightly. Steve looks back at Clint. You got a suit. Clint nods. Yeah. Steve looks at them. Then suit up. He leaves. Time skip, Quinjet. One of the S.H.I.E.L.D. engineers looks over. Hey, you guys aren't authorized to be in here. Steve raises his hand. Son, just don't. Scroll. Alisa's POV. Alisa closes her book before getting up and leaves the trailer, locking it up, and she starts to head back home. But her senses flare up, and she looks around to see if anything's happening, but nothing does. Huh, that's weird. She mutters to herself before shaking her head and walk on. S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve's POV. In New York, the machine starts and the wormhole starts to open, and the Chitauri comes out of the hole and start their attack on people. Loki shot the craft that held Natasha, Clint, and Steve, and they fall to the ground and they get out of the jet. All of them ran toward Army as Steve yells. We have to get back up there. The wormhole growls as a bigger ship comes out. Steve spoke through his comms. Stark, are you seeing this? Tony flew past. Seeing, still working on believing. Where's Banner? Has he shown up yet? Steve asks confused through the comms. Banner. Just keep me posted. Jarvis, find me a soft spot. Natasha and Clint are crouched behind the taxi, and Steve runs over. Clint looks over to Steve. We've got civilians trapped. Loki flies past them, and Steve got his eye on him. Loki, they're fish in a barrel down there. Natasha shoots at the aliens before looking over to Steve. We got this, it's good. Go. Steve looks at them. Do you think you can hold them off? Clint looks over to him. Captain, it would be my genuine pleasure. He grabs an arrow and shoots it, hitting one alien in the head. The arrow quickly separates into more arrows, killing 3 Chitauri aliens. Steve leaves the other 2 fighting and jumps off an overpass, rolling onto a bus and into the street. Steve lands onto a car and looks over to the cops. You need men in these buildings. There are people inside, and they're going to be running right into the line of fire. You take them to the basements or through the subway. You keep them off the streets. I need a perimeter as far back as 39th. One cop looks around before looking at Steve. Why the hell should I take orders from you? 2 Chitauri warriors attack Steve. He fights them off easily, then turns back to the 2 men. The 2 cops stand shocked before the sergeant calls in what Steve ordered. Everyone arrives near Steve, Natasha and Clint. Steve looks over to Thor. What's the story upstairs? Thor looks at him. The power surrounding the cube is impenetrable. Tony flies past as he spoke through the comms. Thor is right. We gotta deal with these guys. Natasha looks at them. How do we do this? Steve looks at them. As a team. Thor speaks up again. I have unfinished business with Loki. Clint readying some arrows. Oh yeah, get in line. Steve walks on. Save it, Loki's gonna keep this fight focused on us, and that's what we need. Without him, these things could run wild. We got Stark up top. He's gonna need us to. The Avengers see Bruce coming over in a motorbike. Bruce walks over to them after he gotten off the bike. So, this all seems horrible. Natasha looks at him. I've seen worse. Bruce does an awkward smile. Sorry. Natasha nods at him. No, we could use a little worse. Steve spoke through his comms. Stark, we got him. Tony spoke up. Banner. Just like you said. Then tell him to suit up. I'm bringing the party to you. Tony flies around the corner and toward the group, followed closely by the Leviathan. Natasha looks confused slightly. I don't see how that's a party. Bruce looks at the Leviathan before walking toward it, but Steve stops him. Dr. Banner, now might be a really good time for you to get angry. Bruce looks over to him. That's my secret, Captain. I'm always angry. Bruce starts to turn into the Hulk. The Hulk punches the Leviathan, smashing it into the ground. Tony flew toward him. Hold on. Tony blasts a missile at the creature and it explodes. Hulk darts away as Every gets to cover. The Chitauri's cry out and the Avengers stand in a circle. Hulk roars. Clint knocks an arrow. Thor readies Mjolnir. Natasha loads her gun. Steve stands ready and Tony hovers above them, landing next to the Hulk. Loki looks down from above. Send the rest. The Avengers look up, watching as more Leviathans and hundreds of warriors fly through the portal. Natasha speaks up. Guys. Tony looks over to Steve. Call it, Captain. Steve steps forward. All right, listen up, until we can close that portal. Our priority is containment. Barton, I want you on that roof, eyes on everything. Call out patterns and strays. Stark, you got the perimeter. Anything gets more than 3 blocks out, you turn it back or you turn it to ash. Clint looks over to Tony. Can you give me a lift? Tony nods. Right, better clench up Legolas. Tony grabs Clint and flies him up to the top of a building, then flies off. Steve looks over to Thor. Thor, you got to try and bottleneck that portal, slow them down. You got the lightning, light the bastards up. Thor swings Mjolnir and he flies off. Steve looks at Natasha. You and me, we stay here on the ground, keep the fighting here. And Hulk. Hulk turns to face Steve and does a little grin as Steve tells to smash and starts to smash the army up. The fight starts between everyone, and Natasha fights a warrior and she uses her widow bite on it, shocking him before she grabs the Chitauri's gun and shoots him back. Steve lands behind her, so she quickly turns and aims until she realizes it's Steve. She stands down and leans against a car. Captain, none of this gonna mean a damn thing if we don't close that portal. Steve looks at the portal. Our biggest guns couldn't touch it. Well, maybe it's not about guns. Steve looks at her before looking away. If you want to get up there, you're going to need a ride. Natasha sees and Kraft fly past and makes her way over to the other side of the overpass. I got a ride. I could use a boost, though. Steve looks at her. You sure about this? He readies his shield in front of him. Natasha nods. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Natasha runs at Steve, who uses his shield to boost her up. She grabs onto a passing Chitauri vehicle. Steve looks up as she flies off in the distance. He looks to his right, and there are more warriors coming. Natasha climbs aboard the craft, pulls a dagger and stabs a warrior. She kicks him off the craft. She makes her way to the other one and uses him to control the vehicle. Turn, ah. 2 crafts come up on Natasha, firing at her. She swerves to avoid them. The crafts are blasted away by Iron Man, who fires away at a fleet behind him. Iron Man takes a turn, coming up on the overpass, where he knocks Chitauri aliens over and lands by Steve, who is fighting and kicking Chitauri. Steve lifts his shield. Iron Man reflects a repulsor blast off the shield, taking out the surrounding warriors. He then flies up the side of a building, hitting more warriors, at the top of which Barton fires into the head of a Chitauri. 2 blasts are fired at him. He ducks and returns a shot by firing an arrow. The arrow hits the pilot of a craft, which falls and gets hit by a Leviathan. On the creature is the Hulk, who is fighting off warriors. Thor then lands on the same creature and takes on warriors with Hulk. When Hulk breaks a piece of the creature's armor off, Thor uses Mjolnir to summon lightning and drive the metal into its head. The creature crashes to the ground. Landing in, Thor and Hulk dismount the creature and stand together, breathing heavily. Suddenly, Hulk punches Thor out of shot. Selvig, having been knocked out when Tony tried to stop the Tesseract, awakens. He looks around. He's free from Loki's control. Army tanks and soldiers begin to arrive on scene. They shoot at the Chitauri, a little amazed of what is going on. Steve is on the ground, holding off a Chitauri's weapon. He pushes the warrior off and onto sharp debris. As he stands, Clint spoke through the comms. "Captain, the bank on 42nd past Madison. They've cornered a lot of civilians in there." Steve replies, "I'm on it." Steve walks off. In the bank, a crowd of civilians are surrounded by 3 armed warriors. Steve jumps through a window and begins to 183 fight. He snaps the neck of one and throws him into the pit. Everyone clear out. He is then grabbed by a warrior, who he fights and breaks free. A grenade-like device goes off, and it blasts Steve out a window and onto a car after his mask is pulled back from his face. He stands silently, while police lead the civilians from the building. Natasha on board a Chitauri craft. She is shot at from behind and turns to see Loki on another craft, following behind. She continues toward the building Barton is at. "Oh, you!" she speaks to Clint through the comms. "Hawkeye." Clint sees her coming in the distance. "Nat, what are you doing?" "A little help." Clint knocks his arrow, waiting for Natasha and Loki to come past. "I got him." Barton aims and fires. Loki catches the arrow inches from his face and looks first at it, then at Barton, smirking. The arrow explodes, sending Loki crashing onto the platform at the top of Stark Tower. Natasha jumps off the craft. She flips in the air, landing onto the roof. She rolls, sticking the landing. She flips her hair back. Loki looks up at Romanoff when Hulk leaps up, grabbing him and throwing him through the window of the penthouse. He roars and moves towards Loki, who gets to his feet. Loki shouted, "Enough, you are all of you beneath me. I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by." Hulk cuts him off by grabbing his feet and smashes him into the floor repeatedly, then throws him aside and walks away. Puny god. Loki whimpers in pain. He has been beaten into submission. With Natasha, she walks toward the Tesseract. Selvig stops Natasha. "The scepter." Natasha looks over to him. "Doctor." Selvig looks at her, then down the building. "Loki's scepter. The energy. The Tesseract can't fight, but you can't protect against yourself." Natasha reassures him. "It's not your fault. You didn't know what you were doing." He looks at her. "Actually, I think I did. I built a safety to cut their power source." Natasha looks away. "Loki's scepter. It may be able to close the portal, and I'm looking right at it." Thor is aboard a craft fighting Chitauri. The craft swerves when a Leviathan crashes through a building, followed closely by Stark, who is shooting at it with lasers. Jarvis speaks up. "Sir, we will lose power before we penetrate that shell." Tony pulls away from the Leviathan. "Jarvis, you ever hear the tale of Jonah?" Jarvis answers, "I wouldn't consider him a role model." Iron Man's knee plates open, pushing out blades. He is heading directly toward the creature's mouth. He flies through it, blowing up the creature's insides and out the tail end. He crashes to the ground but gets to his feet, only to be shot down again by warriors. Barton is attacked by warriors on the Rook. He reaches for an arrow, but his quiver is empty. He instead uses the bow to fight them off. Looking up at the sky and seeing hundreds of approaching flying crafts, he pulls a single arrow from the body of a Chitauri and changes its head with the push of a button on his bow. In slow-mo, the Chitauri fire and Barton leaps off the building as it explodes, twisting in midair, then firing the arrow. Its head opens up into a grappling hook which attaches to the side of the building. Barton swings from the wire still attached to his bow and crashes through a window into a lower floor of the building. Hulk being attacked by Chitauri warriors. He throws them off and turns his attention to the sky, where dozens of crafts are flying over him, and roars. They all fire at once and Hulk is encompassed in smoke and flame. He roars. A jet is being lifted from the hangar and to the deck. Nick speaks through the comms to Tony. "Stark, do you hear me? You have a missile headed straight for the city." Tony replies, "How long?" 3 minutes max. The payload will wipe out Midtown. Tony speaks to Jarvis. "Jarvis, put everything we got into the thrusters." Jarvis replies, "I just did." Iron Man blasts away warriors and flies off elsewhere. The jet fires the nuke towards the city and turns around. Steve and Thor catch their respective hammer and shield. Steve and Thor turn and fight off Chitauri warriors. Steve is shot in the ribs and drops to the ground. Thor sends a car rolling towards some of them, and then throws Mjolnir in the other way. He helps Captain to his feet. "You ready for another bout?" Steve looks at him. "What, you getting sleepy?" Natasha has retrieved Loki's scepter, and Selvig is setting up his equipment. He points to the device. Right at the crown. Natasha begins to push the spear through the barrier surrounding the cube. It's hard to break. "I can close it. Can anybody copy? I can shut the portal down." Steve looks up. "Do it." Tony speaks up. "No, wait. Stark, these things are still coming. I got a nuke coming in. It's gonna blow in less than a minute." Stark flies towards the missile, following closely behind it, and I know just where to put it. He grabs a hold of it, and he begins to redirect it toward the city. Steve speaks through the comms. "Stark, you know that's a one-way trip." After a while, Tony is flying with the missile. Tony is thinking hard and hold. As Tony flies by, Thor and Cap look to the sky. Iron Man redirects the missile, barely missing Stark Tower, and pushes it up towards the portal. The rest of the Avengers look on. Everyone on the Helicarrier cheers in excitement. Fury smiles. Iron Man lets the nuke go as all the lights in his suit go out. Jarvis tries to apologize to Pepper Potts, but was cutting off. He watches as the missile hits the Chitauri mothership, and it explodes. The Chitauri warriors collapse, and the Leviathans fall from the sky. Thor and Steve look around as they do. Tony's eyes close as he falls slowly toward the portal. Natasha stands waiting. "Come on, Stark." Steve tells her to close it, and Natasha plunges the scepter into the heart of the device. Just as the portal closes, Tony falls through back to Earth. The Avengers look up and see Tony reappear. Son of a gun, Iron Man plummets to the ground. Thor speaks up. He's not slowing down. Thor prepares to fly at Stark and catch him when the Hulk grabs him out of the air, slides down the side of a building, and crashes to the ground in front of Thor and Steve. Hulk throws Tony off him, and Thor and Steve run over. Thor pulls off Iron Man's faceplate, and Steve listens for a heartbeat, then sees the arc reactor is not glowing. Suddenly the Hulk roars and beats his chest. Tony, shocked, gasps and opens his eyes, looking around. "What the hell? What just happened? Please tell me nobody kissed me." Steve smiles. "We won." Tony looks at him. "All right, hey, all right, good job, guys. Let's just not come in tomorrow. Let's just take a day. You ever tried shawarma? There's a shawarma joint about 2 blocks from here. I don't know what it is, but I want to try it." Thor speaks up. "We're not finished yet." Tony nods. "Then shawarma after." Time skip, Stark Tower. Loki weakly gets up to sit down, and he looks at the Avengers who are pointing their weapons at him. "If it's all the same to you, I'll have that drink now." Thor takes Loki back to Asgard, and Steve shakes Tony's hand before walking over to his motorbike, holding a bag of shawarmas for him and Alisa, after he told Tony that he has to head back somewhere. Scroll. Alisa's POV. Alisa still feels her grim senses going off as she's outside of a store, and she looks around before hearing a growl, and she slowly reaches for her weapon before seeing the same guy who murdered Nick Burkhart, and she freezes. She sees the man shift into Siegbarst. The way he looks right at her, like he's been waiting, like he's been hoping she'd show up. "Little Grimm," he murmured, voice smooth with venom. "I wondered when one of you comes sniffing around where you don't belong." The Siegbarst walks towards her with terrifying speed. His claws scrape the pavement as he pushed off. Alisa threw herself aside, and the claws caught her jacket, tearing fabric and almost taking skin with it. She hit the ground hard, shoulder slamming into the sidewalk. Pain lanced down her arm, and her weapon nearly flew out of her grip. She bit back a gasp, rolling just as the Siegbarst's weight crashed down where she'd been. The world shook, people screamed, cars honked. Somebody shouted, "Call 911." Alisa scrambled to her feet, adrenaline pushing through the pain like wildfire. She ran, not away, never away, but toward the narrow gap between buildings, a tight alley where he couldn't throw his full strength at her without getting trapped. The Siegbarst followed. Of course he did. A beast-like that didn't let prey choose the battlefield. He owned it. Alisa darted into the alley and turned, but the Siegbarst was already there. Too fast, too close. His claws slashed toward her stomach, and Alisa raised her weapon to block, but the impact slammed into her arms like a car crash. She staggered back, shoulder hitting brick. The weapon clattered against the wall. She forced herself forward, stabbing out, and the blade caught his side but not deep enough. The Siegbarst roared, twisting, backhanding her like she weighted nothing. Alisa flew sideways. Her body hit the alley wall, then the ground. Her vision flashed white. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. Her ribs screamed. She pushed herself up on shaking arms, coughing, trying to drag air into her lungs. The Siegbarst stepped closer, slow now. Like he had all the time in the world, like he wanted her to understand the hopelessness. His shadow swallowed her. His breathing was loud and wet, like something enjoying the moment too much. Alisa lifted her head. She forced herself to meet his eyes. Not because she wasn't scared, because she was. But she refused to look away. "You killed Nick," she rasped. The Siegbarst tilted his head again, mockingly curious. "And you care," his voice rumbled, twisted through his monstrous form. Alisa's jaw tightened. "I care because he mattered." His smile was worse in this form. Teeth too long, eyes too dead. "Everyone thinks they matter," he said, "until they don't." Alisa's fingers curled around her weapon again. Pain screamed in her body with the movement. But rage burned hotter. Her grim senses weren't the only fear. They were fury. She lunged upward, slashing across his chest. The blade drew blood, dark, thick, dripping onto the concrete. The Siegbarst roared, staggering back, but Alisa didn't stop. She struck repeatedly. She wasn't strong enough to outpower him. She wasn't fast enough to outmatch him. But she was angry enough to keep moving. The Siegbarst swung down with both claws. Alisa barely rolled, but the claws tore into her side. Hot, sharp, immediate. She screamed. It rippled through her like fire. Her body jerked, hands flying to the wood. Blood soaked her shirt instantly. Everything slowed. Her fingers slipped from her fingers. No, not like this," she murmured. She tried to crawl back, pressing herself against the wall, dizzy and shaking. The Siegbarst loomed over her again, savoring her weakness. Alisa's vision blurred, her ears rang. She could hear her own heartbeat like a drum. The Siegbarst crouched, claw lifting, and Alisa's hand found her weapon again, and with the last of her strength, she shoved the blade upward. Hard. Straight into his leg. The Siegbarst howled, jerking back in pain. It wasn't enough to kill him, but it was enough to make him stumble. Enough to give her seconds. Alisa didn't waste them. She grabbed the blade with shaking hands and forced herself up and ran. Every step was agony. Her side burned, blood warmed down her skin. She stumbled out of the alley into the street, nearly collapsing onto the sidewalk. Someone screamed again. A woman ran towards her and froze when she saw the blood. "Oh my God, oh my God." Alisa tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. Her mouth felt numb, her legs buckled. She fell to her knees. The last thing she saw before darkness crept in was the Siegbarst stepping out of the alley again, limping, eyes locked on her. Still hunting, still smiling. And then the world tilted, the sounds faded. Her body went heavy. And Alisa dropped, face first into the cold pavement. Time skip, hospital. Alisa slowly wakes up, her eyelids fluttering open. White ceiling, the smell of antiseptic. The sting of something in her arm. She tried to move, but pain exploded through her side so violently she gasped. The sound came out broken, and instantly, someone was there. Hey, don't move," a nurse said firmly, hands gentle but unyielding as she pressed Alisa back down. Alisa's breath shook. Her mouth felt dry and her throat burned. She turned her head slightly and saw the gauze wrapped around her ribs. Thick, clean, fresh. Meaning they'd stopped the bleeding. Meaning she'd been closer than she realized. Her eyes flicked around the room. A monitor, IV lines, a bag of fluids dripping steadily. Alisa swallowed hard. Her voice came out hoarse. "Where?" The nurse gave her a look that said, "Don't do this right now," but answered anyway. "Hospital. You were found bleeding on the street. You're very lucky." Lucky, Alisa almost laughed. She almost cried, because lucky wasn't the word she'd use. Her body trembled, not from pain, from fear catching up now that adrenaline was gone. Her grim senses still buzzed faintly under her skin, like they didn't trust the walls around her. Like they knew monsters didn't care about hospitals. Alisa stared at the ceiling, blinking hard. Nick was dead. And his killer was still out there. And she'd just become a target. A nurse adjusted something at her side. Alisa hissed, flinching. "I know," the nurse said softly. "I'm sorry. You took a nasty hit, deep lacerations. We had to stitch you up. You lost a good amount of blood." Alisa's fingers curled weakly into the blanket. Her voice trembled. Did you call the police?" The nurse hesitated. "We did." After a while, Monroe walks into the room. Alisa looks over to him, but her voice was weak. "Monroe." "Alisa, what happened?" "Siegbarst, the same one, who murdered Nick." Alisa weakly reached out for his hand. "Promise me something." Monroe takes it and looks at her as she finishes it off. "Tell Steve about Grimm World. I can't do it, not like this." Monroe hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course I will." Alisa smiled, not knowing that Steve is on his way back.